fallen in love. And in a similar way, you may know already of the poem My Boy Jack, and you may assume that this is about Kipling's son Jack. Kipling did not have a son Jack. In those days it was traditional for alternating generations to name their firstborn son with alternating names. So the Kiplings had been John and Joseph for several generations. So it was John Kipling who was born in 1897, and it was John Kipling whose body is still missing somewhere in France after he died shortly after his 18th birthday. However, in 1916, at the Battle of Jutland, a very young boy, Jack Cornwell, was mortally wounded at his gun on board the Chester. He stayed at his post despite his wounds, was brought back to England and buried in a pauper's grave. The press took up his case. They called for a BC for young boy Jack Cornwell. It was in all the papers in mid-1916. Kipling had lost his son and didn't know where he was, and he knew there were many, many parents who felt like he did, that there was so much fuss made about one boy who was at least safely home and now reburied with full military honours. And so for them, Kipling wrote about the boy Jack, lost at sea. If you know the poem, you may have wondered why Kipling set it at sea when John was a soldier and killed at Lewes. That doesn't alter the fact that Kipling's heart was in this poem and that it is extremely moving. And it's very fitting indeed that this glorious garden today reflects it. Have you news of my boy Jack? Not this tide. When you think that he'll come back? Not with this wind blowing, or this tide. Has anyone else had word of him? Not this tide. For what is sunk will hardly swim. Not with this wind blowing and this tide. Oh dear, what comfort can I find? None this tide, nor any tide, except he did not shame his kind, not even with that wind blowing and that tide. Then hold your head up all the more, this tide and every tide, because he was the son you bore and gave to that wind blowing and that tide.